Okay, I think we are now live, so I can say hello to our audience and tell you that you're in for a treat because you get to meet one of the nicest people on the planet, a very long time dear friend that I haven't been in touch with enough over the last few years. So I'm going to get caught up with our friendship, and you can listen in, all right? This is Dr. Mary-Wynne Ashford, and we're going to just have a one-on-one conversation again tonight instead of a panel discussion. But it will be about, you can bet it will have a lot to do with nuclear weapons and the predicament that we're in, because that is what Mary-Wynne does, and that's what I do too. But Mary-Wynne very much is committed to working on nuclear weapons and the prevention of nuclear war. Dr. Mary-Wynne Ashford is a physician or has been a physician. She's retired now. Recently, in the last few years, been retired as a physician, but she has been very, very active in the International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War. I knew her back in the early or mid 80s. What was your title, Mary-Wynne, when you were at the IPPNW?
I was co-president, and I was a busy co-president because I was the Anglophone. There were three of us, and one was a Soviet and one was from the developing world. And then I was the third one. So I ended up doing a lot of the public speaking for IPPNW for those years.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And you certainly did become a public speaker because you're still doing it, right?
I am still doing it. I can't believe it.
Well, but I don't even know how to introduce you properly because you've had such an interesting career. But this, I should even explain what IPPNW is, because some of our viewers may not know that it is the International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War. And it was a very active organization during the 1980s and had a lot of influence in the thinking of Gorbachev. And I think it was really Gorbachev who took the initiative to make the changes that eventually he and Reagan jointly made, which looked like we were going to get rid of nuclear weapons for a while.
We did.
But somebody interfered with that process. Mary-Wynne, could you just give me a little synopsis of your CV? The last 20 years, what have you done with your life?
Okay. Well, I became a doctor in 1981. I became a doctor late in life. I was 41 when I graduated. And then a couple of years later, I heard Helen Caldicott speak at the university. And I simply could not believe that there were 60,000 nuclear weapons. As it turns out, there were 70,000, but we thought there were 60,000 nuclear weapons. And I kept thinking, I'm so glad that she's doing that, looking after us, but I couldn't sleep. So I finally, because honestly, I didn't sleep for 3 nights and I was just exhausted. And I thought, I'm going to have to do something, become active in some way. So I became active in our local chapter of what was then called Physicians for Social Responsibility, now called Physicians for Global Survival here in Canada. And became active there, and then became active in the international group. In, I guess, 1985, I went to my first international congress of IPPNW and loved the work that they were doing, loved having the chance to see how the United Nations worked. That's where I met you, was at the UN Conference on Disarmament in 1988. And since then, I have worked internationally with IPPNW. I became a co-president in 2000, from 2000 until 2004.
Excuse me, who was your co-presidency with? Who was the Russian at that time?
The Russian was Sergei Kolesnikov, and the other person was, well, the first time it was Abraham Bahar from France, and then the second time it was from Malaysia, Ron McCoy. My mind went blank there for a minute. Ron McCoy, who is still very active. He's a retired obstetrician and still very active in IPPNW. And I should mention that in 1985, IPPNW won the Nobel Peace Prize, and that was for our work bringing together Soviet and American doctors to raise the alarm for the world that in the event of a nuclear war, medicine has absolutely nothing to offer, that the only thing we can do is prevent. So that's been our same line ever since the early 80s. The organization was founded in 81, and it continues to have that mandate. Now, recently, 10 years ago, Tilman Ruff, who was then, I think he was a co-president then, may have been just on the board of IPPNW, founded a second organization that's a coalition, and that's called ICAN, the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons. And he founded it along with some other people, but it mainly started in Australia and moved to Australia and then to Austria and then to Geneva. And ICAN won the Nobel Peace Prize this past year because it's a coalition that has brought together more than 460 different disarmament organizations all over the world. And they put on a series of conferences talking about the humanitarian consequences of a nuclear bomb. Now, it's amazing to me that in all these years since the first nuclear weapons were used and then the tests went on, Russia and the Soviet Union and China and so on. It's amazing to me that all the discussions were focused on security and deterrence. And there was no discussion about what happens to human beings. So when the first of those conferences was held in Norway, I guess nearly 3 years ago, I think the young diplomats were really shocked to learn the truth about...
You think that the guys doing negotiations didn't know what they were dealing with?
No, I think that they knew, but I don't think it was a part of their consciousness in the same way it was once they actually heard the Hibakusha speak and they looked at the photographs of Hiroshima. They weren't doing that at the UN, I don't think. And I think a lot of those ambassadors are highly skilled diplomats, but I don't think that they have gone into really the humanitarian side and just exactly what would happen to us in terms of financial destruction and crop destruction and the changes in climate and so on. So Norway shook them up and they insisted on another meeting right away and had one in Mexico. And again, after that, they met in Austria.
You mean it was some of the nuclear negotiators who actually wanted more? It wasn't just peacemates who were promoting the second meeting.
This was the ambassadors from many, many different countries, up to 140 countries eventually. Not the nuclear weapons powers, I must say. They boycotted all of these meetings. But it was the other countries in the world, and so many of them came together to hear all of the consequences and then to say, this is not acceptable. We cannot have these weapons around. They will get used accidentally or by intent. And at that point, the Austrian government said, okay, we are going to take this to the United Nations and we're going to call for a treaty to ban them. Now that's taken up until this past September when the treaty came to the floor of the United Nations ready to be signed. Canada, unfortunately, is not signing so far.
And last week I had the conversation with our health end. So
yes.
You can be sure that you and he are both on the same page. I don't think there was any question of that. But he was suggesting that really Canada is a very likely and a very plausible country to be taking the initiative, a leadership role, if they do it, if we would do it, if our country would do it.
No, we still have that influence that we had years ago when you and I were going to the UN, and Canada was so highly regarded by other countries who saw us as the honest broker. And we kind of lost that reputation, and now we're back, as the government says. And I think we have the duty now to lead and to bring the the other like-minded countries to come and sign the treaty. And I think that it's going to take some of the Scandinavian countries to join with us, and then we'll get it signed and ratified. Because we're up to, what is it, 59 signatures now, and I think 12.
On this, we should say on what it is the treaty on
the treaty. The treaty to prohibit nuclear weapons. And we need 50 signatures that are ratified. And so far we've got 59 signatures, but only 12 ratifications. But still, I understand that that's the fastest process on getting the signatures and getting the ratifications of any disarmament treaty so far. So this is...
Okay, we have skipped right to the heart of the matter. What do they call it? Cut to the chase. But we left out about 30 years of your career along the way. Tell me a little bit about your career as a peace educator in Canada. I know that you were a family physician, and you decided you wanted to do a doctorate in peace studies, was it?
No, I did it in the Faculty of Education. What I wanted to do was look at the roots of violence, and then where do we start to prevent? And I have a degree in education. I used to be a high school teacher, taught chemistry and English. So it was easy to do it through the Faculty of Education. And what I did then, I went in 92. What I did was I studied the violence prevention programs that we had in North America at that time, which I think was 14 programs. I mean, now there are thousands of those.
In universities or in high schools?
No, in high schools. So I studied those and looked at the results of assessments that had been done, and concluded basically that young people can be brought back from this violent engagement that they get into if we provide a lot of connectedness with other people, connectedness with a school or a place, connectedness to a meaningful work or life's purpose, connectedness to their own spiritual basis, connectedness in their families, all of these things, many of the things that First Nations people teach us. So my research was actually on the role of boredom in violence, because I heard the former head of the Willingdon Penitentiary was on the radio just as I was ready to start writing my thesis. And he was asked what young people say when they're taken into custody about why they did their action. And he said, the main answer is, I was bored. And I just about drove my car off the road. It never crossed my mind that someone would do a drive-by shooting because of boredom. So I looked into boredom, studied that. Again, not very much literature on boredom. But what there is tells us that there are there are people who are sensation seekers, who are easily bored and need lots of sensation, but the others are seeking meaning in life. And when you don't have meaning in life, what you complain of is boredom. And those connections that I mentioned are the things that give us meaning. Caring about other people and having other people care about you. You know, this is why midnight basketball with the police is a successful violence prevention strategy, but locker searches are not, because locker searches don't build your connections. So after I did that PhD, I went to UVic, and I taught both in the Faculty of Education. I taught young high school teachers, and in human and social development, I taught violence prevention programs. So I loved that, but I really missed medicine, and I went back into medicine to do palliative care for the last years until I retired. And you know, I still miss being a doctor. I loved delivering babies, and I loved working in palliative care. So it was a good profession for me. But I also love teaching. So being back in the schools now and teaching about nuclear weapons is really, really satisfying.
Okay, tell me about that. You are going what? School to school, classroom to classroom, working out special individual opportunities to give visiting lectures?
Um,
Or do you run a regular course?
no, it's lectures, and I give them with Jonathan Down. Jonathan is a pediatrician who's the incoming president of Physicians for Global Survival in Canada, very active guy, and a terrific man to work with. I just love working with him.
I've met him. He's a sweet person.
Well, we're a good balance because I'm a storyteller and he's a detail person, and that's really a good combination. And he has a lovely personality with kids. So what has happened really, Metta, is that when I started telling people that I wanted to talk to groups, my old network kind of kicked in, and I had all kinds of teachers, connections with teachers who called me up and said, yes, come and teach to 3 classes. Normally it's not just to 1 class. They'll bring together 200 or 250 kids in an auditorium, and we'll go in and do a class on, it's an interesting thing. First we talk about nuclear weapons and Hiroshima and Nagasaki and what happened.
This is like a team teaching thing, you and Jonathan Down.
That's right. We have a PowerPoint and we take turns. One person talks for 5 slides and then the other person. I knew from my teacher friend who's just finishing up her master's, she said, you have to be prepared that these students now know nothing about nuclear weapons. And she said, I really mean nothing. So please start with the very basics. Mm-hmm. And with that in mind, I thought, you know, what influenced me when I first got into the peace movement in the 80s and calmed me down, because I was really in a state of horror and panic and waking in the night and all of that. What settled me down was that we sang songs all the time. I'm sure you were in the same kind of group where you would be listening to lectures and then there would be a break and everyone would stand and sing We Shall Overcome. And then you were able to carry on. And for me, that was a very important part of the work. So I asked this young woman if it would be all right if I brought some singers with me and we would just lead the kids in singing We Shall Overcome and all we are saying is give peace a chance, the John Lennon song. And she said, oh, sure, do whatever you want. So I was thinking first that I would tell them really the frightening part about nuclear weapons. And then we would sing and kind of calm down. And then I would talk about all of the successes of civil society, because we have had amazing successes. We brought in a landmines treaty, and it only took 4 years from the time we had that first meeting in London, England, until that treaty was up for signing. And that's amazing. And that was civil society bringing in people like Lloyd Axworthy, who was our Minister of Foreign Affairs, and Princess Diana, and so on. So I wanted the young people to know that this is not a hopeless endeavor. This is something where we're having a lot of success. The treaty to ban biological and chemical weapons, bringing about the court.
The International Criminal Court?
International Criminal Court, thank you very much, so that brutal dictators don't get away with things anymore. These are successes of civil society. Plus, we have changed a lot of attitudes about weapons and war. So I tell those stories and I talk about the SAGE students, the Students Against Global Extermination, who went across Canada when they were supposed to be in grade 12 in 1997, and they crossed the whole country talking to high school kids, and they were featured in that National Film Board documentary called Mile Zero, which is still wonderful, a wonderful movie. So I tell those stories and then I do question and answer. Anyway, my intuition about the music turned out to be really right on, and much more to the point than I imagined. After the first talk that I gave to these 250 kids, I said to them, look, I'm going to be working with Dr. Down and we're going out to other schools. I want your feedback about what more you want in this talk, what you think I can leave out, what information you need, what more can we do? I don't want you just to say, oh, this was wonderful, best ever. I want you to give me honest feedback. What is good and what should we change? So the teachers replied, thank goodness for the music. They said, by the time you had finished showing us the slides of Hiroshima and what happened and the ongoing problems and the number of nuclear weapons and the threat of nuclear war between North Korea and the United States, they said we could hardly breathe. And then finally we sang. The students said, what was all that singing about? So after that, we learned that we have to actually tell the students why we're singing. So after we've done the difficult part, I now say, or Jonathan says, this is hard information for us to take in because it's not been in the news all the time, and you guys are hearing it for the first time. And I can tell you that it's just as disturbing for us to say it every time as it is for you to hear it. So we need to have an emotional kind of calming down time. And singing is a good way for us to calm down. And so we ask them if they'll stand with us and sing. And they hate singing together. So they don't want to one bit. So they're very resistant. And this is where it really helps that I take a group of singers with me. I'm in a choir of 300 people. And so I just put the word out that we're doing something in a school, and can anybody come? And anywhere from 12 to 24 people come. Almost always all four parts, soprano, alto, bass, and tenor. So we can sing really well. And they kind of joke with the kids, and we stand and hold hands. Well, now I've discovered at last how to get them to all sing. And it was a group of grade 9 kids who showed me. I started singing We Shall Overcome, and this boy whipped out his iPhone and he held it up and he put the candle on and he started singing and waving it back and forth, and all the kids stood up and waved their phones back and forth and they all sang. So now I know that's how you do it. It doesn't feel like they're singing in class anymore. Anyway.
Can I ask you a comparison though? Because I remember maybe 10 years ago, we were talking about the same idea, going out to the schools, giving talks in the schools. I think you were doing, to some extent, you were doing it then. And the message I was getting was they don't give a hoot. They're not interested in nuclear weapons. You can't get them to care, etc.
Yeah.
Now, am I remembering correctly? Is there a change?
There's a huge change.
Okay.
First of all, I'm talking to very idealistic students. The teachers who are asking me to come are teachers in special programs like global citizenship and things like that. But the other thing is these kids are working on climate change and they're already active. But when we tell them about nuclear weapons, and especially, we just hate telling them about the threat of nuclear war between North Korea and the United States, because they're not aware of that. They're not aware that if that became a bigger war, if it involved China or Russia or more from the United States, we could be talking about really the end of life on Earth again. And we hate saying that because they're already facing climate change. Mm-hmm. But we have to tell them the truth and then tell them this is one that we're winning. This is one that we really can succeed in changing. But they are so...
Well, we can win climate change too. In fact, I think we need to, this is a different story, but I do think we need to look at how they are connected and
Absolutely.
Regard it as a joint campaign on both.
Absolutely. And freeing up $1 trillion for one thing is
yeah, absolutely. The money part is a good part of it. Yeah.
But the kids are so shocked because now, instead of just talking about nuclear weapons, now we're having to give them the details about the weapons, just like those diplomats. they're not aware of what happens when a nuclear bomb explodes. They're not aware about radiation. And when they hear it, they look so shocked and so upset. And then we say, you know, we are going to win this one. We are on our way to abolishing these weapons. And now we need some energy from younger people. Mm-hmm. And then by the time we do I just have to go back to the singing for 1 minute. Jonathan and I have done 23 presentations since December. And in those, we've done high school kids, but we've also done service clubs and whatever other contacts I have in the peace movement from the olden days, talking to people over 70. And for the older ones, we have not been taking the choir, mostly because the meetings usually offer us a dinner and so on. We can't ask them to feed 12 singers as well. So the upshot of all of it is that out of 23 talks, 11 of them are without music, and the other 12 were with music. Mm-hmm. And the result is, in the ones where we don't singing together, not listening to a DVD, but standing, singing, holding hands, those ones where we don't do that, the people thank us and they say, we're so grateful that you're doing all of this and please keep up the good work, and then they leave. In the ones where we sing, and this includes singing at a at a meeting of the Green Party, where they sang with us, and my singers go now and join the audience and hold hands with them and stuff. Where we sing, they hang around for almost 45 minutes, between half an hour and 45 minutes. And they start out by saying, I don't believe that I could make any difference. There's nothing I know to do. I can't do anything about this. And then they keep talking. So by the end of 45 minutes, the singers have talked to them about, well, I mean, you could come and sing with us with the high schools. That'd be one thing. Or you can write, or if you can do other things, you know, go to the Peace Walk, go to the Hiroshima Day commemorations, but just do something. Talk about this at home. And we find those people become active. And the students leave our talks and they go and do presentations on their own in their other classes. And this is without my telling them to. They go to the library, they find out more information, and they do a presentation in English. These are usually social studies ones that I'm talking to, but they'll go and do it in their science class. They'll go and do it in a class about media. So if we've done a talk to, say, 50 kids, there'll be 5 kids who've done presentations afterward. And that to me is really exciting. That's really exciting.
And you're saying then that the injection of the feeling full part is stimulus to motivation.
I absolutely believe that.
That is something really for us to really think about. I think
we have to know that we're not alone.
Mm-hmm.
And when you sing together, oh, it's such a wonderful thing. Honestly, to sing "We Shall Overcome" and hold hands hits me every time, that we shall, and we're holding hands, and you're on my left and you're on my right, and we're going to do this. We're not alone. And then I'm buoyed up for hours afterward. So I think it's just extremely important. Mm-hmm. We've got some high school kids now who worked with us for the last 6 months, 2 girls, and they organized the what's it called, for our lives, March for Our Lives in Victoria. These 2 girls by themselves organized this big meeting at the legislature.
I'm sorry, I don't know what that is. What is the March for the...
These are the kids in Florida who started marching as a result of the mass murder. Yeah. And they did March for Our Lives all the way across North America. Mm-hmm. Well, these girls just took it up and advertised it on Facebook and organized this really amazing gathering of people, all of us with big banners and so on. So these are super activists. They go with us now to the schools. So, well, they're leaving. They're both at McGill now for the fall, but up until May, they were going with us and doing presentations with us. So Jonathan and I would present the PowerPoint, and then they would talk about what high school kids could do. So it made it very vital and very in the moment for us to be in the classroom.
I hope you'll put them in touch, if they're going to McGill, put them in touch with the people in Montreal, especially this Artists for Peace organization,
Yes.
because the idea that they're doing the art part too, the singing part too, is certainly a terrific
And we
connection.
have a terrific physician.
Yeah, maybe they'll carry the message forward there.
They will, and there'll be such valued volunteers there. They just never stopped volunteering. They were amazing.
Well, I taught for about 5 years. I taught a course at University College for free for fourth-year undergraduates called Public Health in a Nuclear Age. And it was about nuclear weapons and to some extent about nuclear power as well and the alternatives. But they made me stop doing it because they no longer allow people to teach courses for free. Even if you're an emeritus professor, they won't let you do it anymore. So, and what this means is that there is, so far as I can tell right now, not a single course at the University of Toronto where students can learn about nuclear weapons. If this isn't shameful, I don't know what is. It has to be. I was reading today in a British publication, it may have been I don't know, it was online, I think, that the majority of people now in Britain see nuclear weapons as more of a threat than climate change. I didn't expect that. And I may have it wrong. It may be a peculiar survey poll or something like that. But at any rate, the point is that as of now, people are beginning to reawaken to the risk. Even the general public is to some extent more aware of it. Although I can't say that we can give much credit to the mainstream press, because it's certainly ignored there.
I must also tell you about what happens when we speak to the elderly. And I'm more elderly than this, but the 70-year-olds, because there's quite a large group that we'll end up talking to at a church, and it's almost always people over 70. Mm-hmm. So I tell the same information about the Hiroshima bomb and show the slides and take the same questions at the end. But afterward, they come up to me and they say, we were activists in the 80s, and we'd forgotten all of this. And we feel so raw and so frightened and so shaken. I'm almost paralyzed. And I said, well, it's time to take action again. So, if you want to know things that you can do, just ask some of the singers, because the singers are talking about it all the time. The singers, many of the singers came to hear us several times. So they would come to a high school and then they come to the next high school. So one of them who had listened to the same talk 3 or 4 times said to me, it took 3 times hearing you before everything sank in.
Oh.
Yes. And I really realized what we're facing.
Mm-hmm.
And she said, would it be all right if I take your set of slides and show them in the Yukon? And that's exactly what we want to happen. We want other people to take it up, show the same, however, whatever kind of PowerPoint they want. But ours is prepared if they want to use that. And talk about it elsewhere, because people are not aware, even the people that I thought knew everything about it. And they did know it in the 80s. But as time has
tell me, Mary-Wynne, what do you have by way of slides? Because, we have here a nuclear weapons working group meets once a month in my building. Oh. And I don't think we have anything on the agenda in terms of our outreach activities. If you have a set of slides, it might be something that I could ask the members of this group to take on and do something like put on presentations at the local public library or something of that kind.
Yes. Oh, yes.
Do you have something you can share with us that way?
I have to, what I do is I don't write a lot of words on the screen. So what I will do is I'll write the stories underneath the slides, like, for example, the SAGE students, the Students Against Global Extermination. I'll write the summary of that story in that notes section of the PowerPoint. And I'll send them off to you, and they're most welcome to use them. And I would love it if they sent me a note back saying what they've done with them, so that I can add that to my
Now, but those are especially useful for high school students, right? Not for the senior citizens.
They're for everybody.
Are they? Okay. Well, we do have one member who's a wonderful high school teacher who has a course specifically for students coming to Toronto from war zones, new immigrant children or high school kids that are in a special class, and she teaches them, and they are crazy about the work that she's giving them on conflict resolution issues and that kind of thing. So that sounds like something for her too. Yeah.
Well, in a case like that, I would suggest that whoever is showing the slides put in their own stories at the end. Instead of my stories, I put in a story about being in Kazakhstan when the Kazakhs and the Nevada Shoshone got together and protested against nuclear testing and actually succeeded in stopping the testing in Kazakhstan. So I put in my story about that because it was a lovely, touching time. But other people would put in their own stories to say, here is a time that people did this and it worked. And it's so important to empower these kids and the adults too, to know what all they can. Yeah.
I want to shift gears a little bit because I know you've had an adventure in the East, which we haven't even worked our way to talking about yet. You've been to North Korea, or did you get into North Korea?
No, I have to tell the background first.
Yeah.
I led 2 delegations of doctors from the International Physicians for Prevention of Nuclear War to North Korea in 1999 and 2000. We spent about a week there, took in some humanitarian aid. We took in some ciprofloxacin that was donated by a pharmaceutical company.
Was that during their famine?
Yeah, it was just after the famine and the floods. And so the people were in desperate need.
Mm-hmm.
And we were to go back in 2001, but that was, of course, September the 11th, put the kibosh on all of that. But the other doctors in IPPNW have been going back. So in the meantime, I have continued to be concerned about the sanctions and the suffering of the people there and the really wonderful work of UNICEF. UNICEF has saved millions.
Which has
UNICEF.
UNICEF.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I didn't know about that.
Wonderful stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So there is a group that in 2015 went into Korea. This is a women's group. It's called Women Cross the DMZ. Pardon me, it is called DMZ. I call it DMZ, but it is called DMZ by them. And with 30 women, including Janice Alton from Canada,
mm-hmm.
who met first in Pyongyang in North Korea, and then with permission, went to the border, crossed the border, and then met with women in South Korea. So they met with 7,000 in the north and 7,000 in the south, talking about the need for reunification and peace between the 2 Koreas. They were going back to repeat that this year. And unfortunately, the situation became really hot and conflicted. So, however, we still planned to go in May, and whether we could get into North Korea or not. So we were to start in South Korea and then, if we got permission, go into the north. They invited me to come to join them because Janice wasn't able to go. So I said I would really love to go and join the group. So 30 of us met in Seoul. We met with 30 women's organizations in South Korea. These organizations are very, very active behind the scenes, doing reconciliation work, arranging for exchange visits from professors to universities outside of North Korea and so on. The YWCA of Seoul has been active getting humanitarian aid into North Korea since the 1970s. I mean, who knew that? Anyway, we met with these women. We took part in a peace march organized by the YWCA of Seoul. And there were 1,100 of us who crossed the demilitarized zone into a peace park where we stopped and rested. We had to walk about 5.5 kilometers in the blazing sun across the reunification bridge. And we were the only civilians ever to have crossed that bridge on foot. So we got into the Peace Park.
Wait a minute, how long is the bridge?
Well, it's 5.5 K, as I can tell you.
Why is it so long? What's it over? It's not a river.
It's in the demilitarized zone. Yes, it's over water. Yes. It's over water there, going into there's a river separating the south and the north, and the demilitarized zone is there.
So they have to have a bridge that long, yeah, right there.
Right, and it's all very, very heavily fortified, and there's razor wire up the sides and all of that, and landmines everywhere, of course. I think
not on the bridge.
No, underneath though, so you can't go swimming across. Mairead Maguire was with us, the Irish.
I've met her, yes.
Nobel Peace Prize. So she was our guest speaker, and she and I just really hit it off very well. I liked her enormously. And after I'd walked 4.5 K, I then accepted the ride from the rescue car that came and picked us up and took us the last way, because it was just boiling hot. Anyway, we were seated in the shade and under tents, and we were eating ice cream. Korean women were dancing. They were out there. I don't know where they got the energy, but they were dancing. They had huge banners, singing. There's a reunification song that both sides know, and they sing. And it was very, very touching.
Now, wait a minute. You hadn't reached the other side yet. You were dancing in the middle of the DMZ.
The DMZ, that's right. We were not permitted to go into the north. Now, we found out afterward, as we got back on the bus to go back to Seoul, we discovered why we weren't going into North Korea, and it was because President Kim Jong-un, or Chairman Kim Jong-un, and President Moon Jae-in were meeting in the demilitarized zone in Panmunjom while we were in the Peace Park. So that's why we weren't able to go all the way across. So that was
they hadn't promised you anyway, though. You were going there in the hope that if you get to the gate, they'll say, come in.
They wouldn't, no. So then we started talking about at that point, President Trump had said that he had canceled the summit that was coming up for the 12th of June. And we got together with the South Korean women. Very interesting. And when President Trump said that, the women just were suddenly deflated, and they said, oh no, isn't that a shame? And then about 5 minutes later, they said, no, it's not. We'll carry on exactly as we are. And North and South will carry on with all of these programs that especially President Moon Jae-in had said. We want the family reunifications. We want the restoration of that joint industrialized zone. We want to decrease the military exercises. And we want to encourage exchanges for professionals from North Korea to go and train outside. And there are a number of those already happening.
Exchanges, how? Explain.
These would be professors from North Korea going to study at universities in the United States and Canada. And in the United States, they've had cardiologists go and study in Boston with cardiologists from Harvard. We've had people coming out to the West in Canada as well. So more of the same, right? You're building confidence and people to say, this is not the enemy. This is a time, finally, that we can have a peace treaty. And there's huge optimism in South Korea because Chairman Kim Jong-un, through getting nuclear weapons, finally had the ear of the United States, and they started talking. And hopefully that will continue, and hopefully it will lead eventually to the reunification of the whole Korean peninsula. But step by step, they need to have some confidence building measures. And I must say, President Moon is just a consummate diplomat. You will notice that whenever he does something, he thanks President Trump for facilitating it. That is brilliant.
Straight face.
Well, he's just such a gentle, sweet man. But we were watching the television in Seoul. We were watching the replay of their meeting at the border, and they hug each other and they put their arms around each other's shoulders and look in each other's eyes.
These two, the North and the South, present.
North and South, just so
human moon.
Yeah, really, it's wonderful to see that. So we're just hoping that we can facilitate everything that we can to make this happen. The South Koreans want it, the North Koreans want it, families really want it. You know, some of them have not seen their relatives for 70 years. Parents not seeing children and vice versa. It's just, it really has been terrible. But the other thing that was of concern to me was the sanctions and brutality of the sanctions. The past year, China had not been stringent with the sanctions, and UNICEF had been busily putting in a lot of humanitarian supplies. So children whose lives were threatened, I mean, the children had been very, very malnourished, suddenly showed, and UNICEF's very, very rigorous about their research into what is the effect of the help that we're giving. And they demonstrated that these kids were now thriving. The mothers were not thriving as much as the children, and they concluded it's because the mothers were giving their rations to the children.
And where are these women?
This is in North Korea. They get the...
Throughout North Korea, or is they're not having a famine now or anything, are they?
No. But the sanctions meant that people were still starving. They were malnourished. I shouldn't say starving at that point. They were malnourished, and they were getting help from UNICEF. Then these new sanctions went in, and UNICEF came out with a report that said they would predict with that level of sanctions that there would be 60,000 children die in the next year, just because they're so dependent on outside aid. Now, Russia and China are not being very stringent in upholding the sanctions, and we're just hoping that enough is getting through. And I mean, I can't give a report on that because I have no idea what's going on there. I'm hoping I'll get back in with...
Well, you know, you hear this concept of targeted sanctions.
Yeah,
if sanctions could be imposed on just the people who are making the decisions and who's going to stand to lose the money or whatever assets they're being deprived of, that is the way to do sanctions and not hurt ordinary helpless people. Are there sectors of North Korean society, as far as you know, who would fit that category of people who have enough influence and who are not actually their survival is not injured by having these deprivations? Is there such a thing as targeting sanctions for North Korea?
The Security Council resolution said that humanitarian aid was supposed to be allowed through, but speaking to the humanitarian aid workers who used to be in North Korea and who left because nothing was coming through. The woman that we know from Sweden, she's Canadian actually, from Sweden. She was working for the International Federation of Red Cross in Pyongyang in North Korea, and she was responsible for ordering the medical supplies and equipment that was needed in North Korea. But she said with the new sanctions, they couldn't get anything. Absolutely, they could not get anything because the companies, the factories that produce medical instruments don't want to send a shipment to North Korea and have it turned back, because it costs them a fortune then to get it back, and they won't take that risk. So as a result, nothing was getting through. She said they had no suture material, they had no rubber gloves, they had no operating gowns. That's the state, the condition. With no humanitarian aid getting through, it's just deplorable. So the Security Council needs to be responsible for this, because they've said that the humanitarian supplies need to go in. So it's up to them, if you ask me. They've set the guidelines. It's up to them to make sure that humanitarian aid does get through, that children are being fed, and that pregnant women are getting prenatal vitamins and all of these things, that people are getting a basic level of food and sustenance.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So,
Now, are there humanitarian organizations, global ones, in North Korea now? Like, is MSF there, or is the Red Cross there, or?
I'm not sure about the Red Cross now, if there are other people since this woman has left. UNICEF still goes in, but they don't have the same amount of programming. They don't have the supplies that they can bring in. So I don't know what they're able to do. There is a Canadian group, the Canadian Food Grains Bank, World Food Grains Bank, is that what it's called? I'm sorry, I may have that wrong. Someone from the Mennonite Central Committee has been working there for years and years and years. Eric Weingarten, who has been doing a lot of work in North Korea, and the Mennonites in the US, so the Central Committee at the United Nations, has also been doing a lot of work in North Korea. And it's just, if you're not allowed to take anything in with you, then you're kind of paralyzed. What can you do that's actually helpful?
Mm-hmm. It's tragic.
Yeah, it is tragic. It is tragic.
How much communication could there be, or is there, between the women, the South Korean and the North Korean women who are these optimistic ladies that you were telling me about? Do they know each other? Do they stay in touch with each other? How close can they be?
They can, except that there's no mail coming and going between them. But they do have, as people come out from North Korea and bring messages and sending messages back and forth, there's much, much more communication than I ever imagined. And there are very active professors and other professional women in South Korea who are simply determined to see Korea reunified. So,
can they broadcast to each other?
No.
No? What happens? Is there some sort of jamming, or what?
Yeah. They now have cell phones in North Korea. They didn't have that when I was there the first times. We had to hand in our cell
We didn't have cell phones either, dear, in those days.
I have one with me, but we had to leave them with customs as we went into North Korea. And I don't know how much things have changed there. They do have a few installations of solar power on some buildings in Pyongyang, but still they're very, very far behind.
But they are getting a sense of what the rest of the world is like, right? And I had the impression that 15 years ago they didn't. They actually were kept isolated and didn't know.
No, didn't know what was going on. No.
Yeah. But there are presumably still camps, prison camps, right?
Oh, it's a brutal dictatorship. It is a really, yes.
There's no indication that that kind of thing is being
eased up. No, not as far as I know. And again, it's very hard to get information out of North Korea, or to, even when you're there, to get a genuine sense of what is going on. But
when these people show such emotional attachment to the great leader, or the Kim family leaders, I've always been puzzled seeing images of people wailing and carrying on if at the news that one of the dynasty has passed on, and wondering to what extent is that real? Do you have any sense of whether or not it really is heartfelt?
I don't know, but I can tell you that if I were there living, I would wail, because if I didn't, I'd be suspect. So, who can assess that? I don't know. But we do know that when dictators are toppled, and we had 60 dictators toppled after, what's his name, Marcos. 60 dictators were toppled with minimal violence, except Ceausescu was violent, but the others, and the people obviously did not like them and were glad to see them gone, no matter what they were showing up until that exact minute. So we can't weigh that. And we
I don't know, because I've been very, this is a side issue and maybe we shouldn't go into it too much, but I've been fascinated by the mentality of people in a dictatorial regime. And, you know, I did so many interviews in Russia with people who said that they never heard a word spoken harshly about Stalin, for example, and many of them still can't bring themselves to say anything that's critical of Stalin.
That's true. And my translator was absolutely shocked and devastated after the collapse of the Soviet Union, when he finally saw himself what the elite had and how well they lived, and he didn't know any of that, and he was a translator for Khrushchev. So, you know, it was a secret. It was a well upheld secret. So yeah, I don't know. And I don't know in North Korea. I just know that it's very tightly controlled, and being there is almost surreal as an experience. Yeah.
Yes, and yet you report these things about women dancing in the heat of the day, you know, and what does it mean to them, you know?
No, that's South Korean women. We didn't have.
Well, yes, but that's what I'm wondering, if they have relationships with the North Korean women. What would if the North Korean women had actually been able to meet with you, would they have been dancing too?
Well, when the women across the DMZ met in North Korea and Pyongyang, it was very much a staged event. There were 7,000 women all dressed in Korean traditional dress. They sang and they danced and they did a performance and they shook hands and so on. That's different from.
That's formal, yeah.
But that's a first step.
I want to change. We're almost at the end, and I want to do my little, I guess you could say this is my advertising, but it's also a recruitment program because I want to ask you if you will participate in the project that I'm engaged in called Save the World. We have Project Save the World going on now, which has, as you may know, we're addressing 6 global threats that are all interdependent and that I think need to be addressed as a system, because they do have causal implications for each other. We had a conference, we had a forum at the end of May, and we arrived at an agreement by consensus to pick 25 different public policy proposals that we would try to put together on one sheet of paper, a list that could be adopted by leaders and activists and professionals addressing all 6 of those global threats as ways of reducing the risk of all 6 of them. So if all of our 25 proposals were implemented, we're pretty sure we would reduce the risk very, very greatly. Not just nuclear war, but certainly including nuclear war. That's one of the biggest ones, of course. And now we're at the phase of writing wikis. We want a wiki to go, as kind of an essay, to go along with each of these 25 proposals. So they will be on our webpage, and people can refer to them to find out the logic behind our choices and all the implications and everything they need to know about these proposals. I'm forming teams of people to do the writing of the wikis, and I would love to have you serve on one of those teams. How would you like to be on the team to write the wikis for dealing with war and weapons, especially nuclear?
Yes, that sounds excellent.
I just recruited a new player. How about that?
Great. So put me on your list.
That's wonderful. And it also means that I can, whoever's watching this, and that means you, we invite other people who may want to participate in this too. I do boost these little videos that we do every week and put them on Facebook and put them here and there, and get them distributed a little more widely than just by hearsay. And those of you who will be watching this are invited, if you're interested, to have a look at the platform for survival. You can go to the webpage called tosavetheworld.ca and click on the thing called Platform for Survival. It will show you the list. There's also a page for each of the 6 global threats where you can have a conversation. I hope you'll go there and enter your thoughts and comments and exchange ideas on those pages. And those of you who like to write and who have special interest or knowledge about one or more of these global threats, which are, by the way, war and weapons, especially nuclear, global warming, famine, pandemics, massive radiation exposure, and now cyber attacks. And if you have knowledge about any of those and want to write about that, go take a look at the wiki page. And for that, it's not inside the regular wiki, inside the regular web page, but you go to wiki.tosavetheworld.ca. And you can see the setup there, where we will begin shortly entering explanations for our choices and elaborating on them, because some of them are kind of vague, not very well spelled out, or we couldn't spell them out that much. We will spell them out much more in these pages, these wiki pages, which will be up indefinitely and will be continued to be updated as we go along. So, Mary-Wynne, you will hear from one of our other team leaders, and those of you who want to join in the effort, just go to take a look at those web pages and get in touch with me or any of the leaders that you see there. This has been fun, my dear. It's now 9:02, and I think we have just got started. We haven't really finished our little catch-up spell, but I've enjoyed every minute of it. And now you can go let your dog back in. I'm so sorry that you had to exclude your dog out of the room and lock the door. And I thought it was a darling dog. So anyway, go back to your dog. Have a wonderful evening, and I will see you folks next week if you tune in again. Thanks, Mary-Wynne, and thank you, folks. Bye-bye.